count 1, findings of jury as to alleged statutory aggravating circumstances, we, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved torture of the victim before death.
Bookman, Nicole Diar. Nicole Diar, born in 1975, was a single mother living in Lorain, Ohio. On the surface, she appeared to be devoted to her 4-year-old son, Jacob. Neighbors often saw her outside playing with him, and she gave off the image of a loving mother trying to rebuild her life after divorce. But behind the curtain, Nicole was drowning in financial troubles. She was in debt, addicted to living beyond her means, and searching for an escape. On the morning of August 27, 2003, that escape came at an unthinkable price. Nicole reported a fire at her home. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. Inside, they found Jacob's body in his bedroom. He had been burned so badly that his tiny frame was barely recognizable. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, a mother losing her only child in a house fire. Nicole herself was rushed to the hospital with minor burns, telling investigators she had tried to save her son, but couldn't get past the flames. But the story began to unravel quickly. Forensic experts discovered traces of gasoline in the house, proving the fire was deliberately set. Even more disturbing, the autopsy revealed that Jacob had high levels of drugs in his system. Powerful sedatives that would have left him unconscious before the fire ever started. This meant he never had a chance to escape. Investigators also uncovered Nicole's motive. Just weeks earlier, she had taken out a hefty insurance policy on her son, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. Financial records showed she was buried in debt, and prosecutors argued that Nicole saw Jacob's death as her way out. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Jurors listened as experts explained how the fire was started, how the boy had been drugged, and how Nicole's story kept changing under questioning. Many wept as photographs of Jacob's charred body were shown. Nicole sat emotionless, showing little remorse. In 2005, she was convicted of aggravated murder, arson, and child endangerment. The jury sentenced her to death, calling the crime one of the most heartless acts they had ever seen. Nicole Diar remains on Ohio's death row to this day, remembered not as a mother who loved her son, but as a woman who sacrificed him for money and left a community forever scarred. Seku. Christie Michelle Scott. Christie Michelle Scott, born in 1978, lived in Franklin County, Alabama. To outsiders, she appeared to be a devoted Christian mother raising her 3 children in a quiet southern town. She attended church regularly, smiled often, and gave the impression of a woman whose life revolved around family. But beneath the image of faith and devotion, financial troubles weighed heavily on her. Bills were piling up, and Christie saw no way out. On the night of August 16, 2008, the illusion of a happy family was shattered. A fire broke out in the Scott family home. As flames tore through the house, Christie escaped with her 2 youngest sons. But her 6-year-old son, Mason, was left behind. Firefighters discovered his body in the charred remains of his bedroom. He had died of smoke inhalation, trapped, and unable to escape. At first, neighbors gathered to grieve, believing Christie to be a heartbroken mother who had just lost her child. But investigators quickly noticed that Christie's behavior did not match the tragedy. Witnesses said she showed little emotion after the fire, and the more police looked, the more suspicious the story became. Fire marshals determined the blaze was intentionally set. Even more damning, investigators uncovered that Christie had recently taken out multiple life insurance policies on Mason. Policies that would pay out tens of thousands of dollars in the event of his death. During questioning, Christie denied any involvement, insisting she loved her son. But the evidence against her kept growing. Experts testified that accelerants were used to spread the fire, and Christie's financial records painted a picture of desperation. Prosecutors argued she sacrificed her own child to relieve her debts and secure insurance money. Her trial in 2009 shocked Alabama. The courtroom was packed as jurors listened to testimony about Mason's final moments. Christie's defense tried to frame the fire as accidental, but jurors were unconvinced. Her lack of visible grief, combined with the financial motive, left little doubt. Christie Michelle Scott was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. She became one of only a handful of women on Alabama's death row. To this day, her case is remembered not just for its brutality, but for the haunting question it raised: how could a mother turn the flames of a home into a weapon against her own child? 3. Tiffany Nicole Moss. Tiffany Nicole Moss, born in 1983, lived in Gwinnett County, Georgia, where she presented herself as an ordinary wife and mother. To neighbors and friends, she seemed quiet, reserved, and devoted to her family. But beneath the calm surface was a disturbing truth, one that would leave a little girl dead and horrify the entire state. In 2013, Tiffany became stepmother to a 10-year-old girl named Imani Moss. While Tiffany cared for her biological children, she began singling out Imani for relentless abuse. The girl was locked in a bedroom, denied food, and treated like an outcast in her own home. While her siblings ate full meals, Imani was given scraps, or sometimes nothing at all. As the months dragged on, her small body wasted away. By October 2013, Imani's condition was critical. She weighed only 32 pounds, the size of a toddler, not a 10-year-old. Her father, Iman Moss, watched silently as Tiffany continued her cruel punishment. When Imani finally collapsed and died from starvation, Tiffany and Iman didn't call for help. Instead, they stuffed the little girl's body into a trash can, doused it with lighter fluid, and set it on fire in a desperate attempt to cover up the crime. The horror was soon discovered. Investigators found Imani's remains in the scorched bin, and the truth of her final months shocked even seasoned officers. Detectives testified that the girl had been systematically starved to death, her growth stunted by months of deprivation. Prosecutors described it as one of the most disturbing cases of child cruelty Georgia had ever seen. During the trial, Tiffany sat mostly silent, showing little emotion. Witnesses recounted the neglect, the isolation, and the cold indifference she displayed while Imani wasted away. In 2019, after years of legal proceedings, Tiffany was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, and child cruelty. The jury sentenced her to death, making her only the third woman on Georgia's death row. The case of Tiffany Moss remains a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it grows within the very walls of a home where a child should have been safe. Imani's story continues to haunt Georgia, a symbol of innocence destroyed by the cruelty of the very person who should have protected her. Number 4. Robin Lee Rowe. Robin Lee Rowe, born in 1957, carried with her a trail of tragedy, but investigators would later discover that those tragedies were not accidents. By the early 1990s, Robin was living in Boise, Idaho, with her husband Randy and their 2 children, Joshua and Tabitha. To the community, she seemed like a devoted wife and mother. But behind that image, she was secretly burdened by debt and desperate for financial security. On the night of February 10, 1992, a devastating fire ripped through the Rowe family's home while they slept. Randy, Joshua, and Tabitha never made it out. All 3 perished in the blaze, while Robin, the only survivor, claimed she had been away staying with a friend that night. To the grieving community, it looked like Robin had narrowly avoided becoming a victim herself. Sympathy poured in, and she played the role of the heartbroken widow. But fire investigators quickly uncovered evidence that turned suspicion toward her. The blaze had been deliberately set with an accelerant, and all signs pointed to premeditation. Digging deeper, detectives discovered that Robin had recently taken out multiple life insurance policies on her husband and children, with payouts totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even more chilling, they learned that this was not the first time fire had followed Robin's family. Years earlier, 2 of her other children had died in separate house fires under unusual circumstances. The pattern was too strong to ignore. Prosecutors built the case that Robin Rowe had sacrificed her own family for money, turning her home into a weapon of profit. During her trial in 1993, jurors listened as experts described how she planned the blaze, ensuring she was not home that night to avoid suspicion. Friends and relatives testified about her obsession with money and her cold demeanor in the days following the deaths. The jury deliberated little before reaching its decision. Robin Lee Rowe was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She remains Idaho's only woman on death row. Her story is remembered as one of calculated betrayal, a mother who chose cashing insurance checks over the lives of her husband and children, leaving behind a legacy of fire, ashes, and haunting questions. Number 5. Heather Leavell-Keaton. Heather Leavell-Keaton, born in 1983, moved to Alabama in the mid-2000s and soon began a relationship with John DeBlyce, a father of 2 young children. At first, she appeared to neighbors and acquaintances as a quiet woman adjusting to life as a stepmother. But behind closed doors, Heather's cruelty began to unfold in ways that would leave 2 children dead and a community horrified. The victims were 5-year-old Natalie and 3-year-old Chase, John DeBlyce's children from a previous relationship. Instead of welcoming them, Heather resented their presence. Over time, she began subjecting the children to abuse that prosecutors later described as systematic torture. The couple forced the children to drink antifreeze and made them endure unimaginable punishments. Both Natalie and Chase suffered prolonged, painful deaths that experts said could have been prevented at any point if either adult had chosen mercy. By 2010, both children were gone. Their small bodies were discarded in isolated wooded areas of Alabama and Mississippi, where they remained hidden for months. When police finally pieced together what happened, the details shocked even seasoned investigators. Heather, far from showing remorse, denied involvement and tried to blame John for the killings. But evidence showed she was an active participant in the abuse and had even encouraged it. The trial revealed a grim partnership fueled by cruelty and neglect. Prosecutors painted Heather as the mastermind who manipulated John, pushing him to rid their lives of the children. Testimony described how the children begged for help in their final days, cries that went unanswered. Jurors listened to chilling details of how antifreeze had been used as poison and how the bodies were hidden to delay discovery. In 2015, Heather Leavell-Keaton was convicted of capital murder. The jury sentenced her to death, making her the first woman on Alabama's death row in decades. John DeBlyce received his own death sentence in a separate trial. Heather's case stands as one of Alabama's darkest reminders of betrayal. Instead of nurturing 2 vulnerable children, she helped destroy them. And her name is now etched in history as a mother figure who turned a home into a house of horror. Of 6. Belinda Janette Magaña. Belinda Janette Magaña, born in 1979, lived in El Paso, Texas, where she was known as a young mother struggling to keep her life together. But in 2002, her name would become synonymous with betrayal and cruelty when investigators uncovered the horrifying way she allowed her own daughter's life to end. Belinda was in a relationship with her boyfriend who disliked her 5-year-old daughter. Instead of protecting the child, Belinda chose her partner over her own flesh and blood. On the night of the crime, the little girl was brutally strangled while Belinda did nothing to intervene. Prosecutors later revealed that not only did Belinda allow the murder to happen, but she actively helped cover it up. After the killing, Belinda and her boyfriend discarded the girl's body as if it were trash. They then attempted to hide their crime by fabricating lies and misleading investigators. The community of El Paso was horrified when the truth came out. A mother had willingly stood by as her child was killed, all for the sake of a man. The investigation moved quickly once inconsistencies in Belinda's story were exposed. Forensic evidence and witness testimony pointed to her direct involvement, showing she valued her relationship more than her daughter's life. During her trial, prosecutors painted her as heartless and complicit, while the defense tried to argue she was manipulated and afraid of her boyfriend. But the jury was unmoved. The sheer brutality of the crime, a child strangled in her own home with her mother's knowledge, left no room for mercy. Belinda Janette Magaña was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in Texas. She remains on death row to this day, remembered not as a victim of manipulation, but as a mother who made a deliberate choice to sacrifice her daughter for the approval of a man. Her case continues to stand as one of Texas's most haunting examples of how maternal instinct can be twisted into betrayal, leaving a community to mourn a little girl who never had a chance. 7. Jessica Marie Hann. Jessica Marie Hann, born in 1976, lived in Riverside County, California. To her neighbors, she seemed like a troubled young mother. but few could have imagined the depth of cruelty she was capable of. In 2001, Jessica's name would make headlines for a crime so brutal that prosecutors later described it as a total collapse of humanity. Jessica had a 3-year-old son who had already endured a childhood filled with abuse. Medical reports showed he had suffered broken bones, repeated injuries, and visible signs of neglect. Yet Jessica continued to live her life largely unbothered, maintaining relationships and going about her days while her son grew weaker and more withdrawn. On the night of his death, Jessica and her boyfriend unleashed a final, violent attack. The little boy was beaten so severely that his small body could no longer endure the trauma. He died from internal injuries after years of abuse had already left him fragile. Instead of showing remorse, Jessica worked with her boyfriend to cover up what had happened, spinning lies about accidents and medical issues. But the truth was unavoidable. Doctors who examined the boy's body confirmed that the injuries were consistent with prolonged systematic abuse, not a one-time event. The investigation revealed Jessica as an active participant, not just a passive bystander. She had failed to protect her son, and worse, had helped create the cycle of torment that led to his death. Witnesses testified about her coldness, her unwillingness to seek help, and the way she put her own desires above her child's safety. In court, prosecutors told jurors they were dealing with a mother who had turned predator. The defense tried to argue that Jessica was manipulated by her boyfriend and lacked the strength to leave him. But the jury was unconvinced. The evidence was clear. She had chosen her own comfort over her son's life. Jessica Marie Hann was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in California. Her case shocked the state and added to the list of women on California's death row. For many, she became the embodiment of a chilling truth, that sometimes the person a child depends on most is the one who brings about their end. 8. Kimberly Cargill. Kimberly Cargill, born in 1966, was a nurse living in East Texas. To many in her community, she seemed like a hard-working single mother trying to raise her children. But behind the polished exterior was a violent streak and a long history of neglect, lies, and abuse. In 2010, that hidden darkness came to light in one of the most disturbing murders in Texas history. The victim was 39-year-old Cherry Walker, a woman with a developmental disability who sometimes babysat for Kimberly's son. Cherry was scheduled to testify against Kimberly in a child custody case. Her testimony could have exposed Kimberly's violent behavior and cost her custody of her children. Faced with the possibility of losing control, Kimberly decided Cherry had to be silenced. On June 18, 2010, Kimberly lured Cherry out of her home under the guise of giving her a ride. But instead of helping her, Kimberly bound her, strangled her, and dumped her body in a rural area. To destroy the evidence, she doused Cherry with lighter fluid and set her on fire. The crime was brutal, cold, and calculated, and it shocked the entire state. When investigators pieced together what happened, Kimberly's carefully maintained image collapsed. Her own children testified that she had been abusive for years. Witnesses spoke about her violent temper and erratic behavior. Medical professionals described a woman who was manipulative, controlling, and willing to cross any line to get what she wanted. During her trial in 2012, prosecutors argued that Kimberly had chosen murder as a way to silence a vulnerable woman who posed a threat to her custody battle. The jury heard about her history of abuse, her criminal past, and her attempts to manipulate those around her. Kimberly sat stone-faced in court as the details of Cherry's final moments were revealed. It didn't take long for the jury to reach its decision. Kimberly Cargill was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death, making her the only woman currently on Texas death row. Her case stands as a chilling reminder of how desperation and cruelty can collide. Instead of facing the consequences of her actions, Kimberly chose to end the life of an innocent woman, a woman who had only ever tried to help her family. 9. Michelle Mills. Michelle Mills, born in 1975, lived in Florida and was once seen as a young mother with her whole life ahead of her. But behind that image was a volatile relationship, simmering anger, and a decision that would shock even hardened investigators. In 1998, Michelle's name would forever be tied to one of the most disturbing cases of maternal betrayal in Florida's history. Michelle had a 2-year-old daughter, a little girl who depended on her for protection and love. But instead of safeguarding that bond, Michelle allowed her own frustrations and relationship issues to spiral into violence. One night, in a fit of rage during an argument with her partner, Michelle strangled her daughter to death. The child's small body was discarded, and in an attempt to escape responsibility, Michelle fabricated a story that her daughter had been kidnapped. At first, her story sparked concern across the community. Police launched searches, neighbors hung posters, and there was an outpouring of support for the grieving mother. But cracks in her story began to show almost immediately. Investigators found inconsistencies in her timeline and behavior that did not match that of a desperate parent. She appeared distant, unemotional, and her lies quickly began to unravel. Forensic evidence ultimately exposed the truth. Michelle herself had been the one to kill her daughter. Detectives confronted her with the findings, and her kidnapping tale collapsed under scrutiny. The revelation horrified the public. A mother, once pitied as a victim, was in fact the killer. Her trial painted a chilling portrait of a woman who placed her anger and personal conflicts above her child's life. Prosecutors described her as selfish and manipulative, willing to spin an entire false narrative while her daughter's body lay hidden. The jury was unmoved by her defense, and the verdict was swift. Michelle Mills was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in Florida. She remains a stark reminder of how quickly sympathy can turn to outrage when the truth emerges. Instead of being remembered as a struggling young mother, she is remembered as a woman who chose violence and deception, leaving a community to mourn a child who should have been safe in her arms. 10. Janette Charlton. Janette Charlton, born in 1972, lived in California and was once seen as a devoted mother. She appeared attentive, presentable, and ordinary, the kind of woman no one would suspect of harboring darkness. But in 2005, behind the doors of her home, she committed an act that horrified her community and cemented her place among the most infamous women on death row. Janette's victim was her infant daughter, a baby who had barely begun life. Instead of nurturing her child, Janette smothered the baby in her crib. At first, she staged the scene to look like a case of sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, a tragedy that strikes without warning. She presented herself as grief-stricken, and for a time, authorities believed her story. Family and friends rallied around her, offering sympathy and comfort. But doctors who examined the child's body noticed irregularities that didn't match the typical signs of SIDS. Medical experts testified that the infant's injuries were consistent with intentional suffocation, not a natural tragedy. Investigators dug deeper, and the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Janette had deliberately taken her child's life. Her motive was never fully understood. Some argued it was rooted in resentment, others pointed to financial or relationship pressures. But whatever the reason, the act itself was undeniable. A mother had silenced her baby forever, then tried to cloak it in the tragedy of crib death. During her trial, prosecutors emphasized the cold, calculated nature of the crime. They described how Janette created a facade of innocence, playing the part of the grieving mother while knowing the truth of what she had done. The defense attempted to argue that she was overwhelmed, unstable, and unable to cope with motherhood, but the jury saw through the performance. In the end, Janette Charlton was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in California. Her case stunned the public because it attacked one of the deepest human instincts, the bond between mother and child. To this day, her name evokes outrage, not just because of the act itself, but because she tried to disguise murder as misfortune. Janette remains a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind a smile, and that sometimes the face of danger looks like the very person entrusted with the gift of life. These women defied the natural bond of motherhood and committed crimes that shocked entire nations. Some killed for money, others for love, and others simply out of cruelty. But in every case, innocent children suffered the price. And tonight, they sit on death row, living proof that not every mother's love is sacred. What do you think? Do any of these cases deserve more mercy, or was justice served? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories every week.